Hello and welcome to this Q&A on all things Turbo Cider related. Before I start, I just want to make it clear that any opinions I give in this video and any other video are mine and mine alone. Alright? If you don't agree with what I'm saying, that's absolutely fine. You're asking my opinion and that's what you're going to get. Alright? So, let's kick off with Strat. Strat is asking about the ABV. What's the ABV of your turbo cider? I'm assuming you mean the roughly general ABV I go for. You're talking about with just concentrate and no additional sugars, anywhere between sort of 4.5–5%, depending on what concentrate you use, depending on where you buy it from as well. So the supermarket concentrated apple juice have all got different levels of sugar in. So you need to find out what sort of works for you and what doesn't really. And add sugar or don't, depending upon your taste. Do you ever put brown sugar into your turbo cider? I have done, with no discernible difference really. If you're going to add a load of sugar in there, then obviously your ABV is going to shoot up and you'll be into sort of 7 or 8% cider. If that's what you want, good luck to you. But you'll only be able to drink a couple of those before you fall over. And I wouldn't recommend it. You might get a little bit of residual sort of toffee sweetness out of it, but I wouldn't expect it's worth the bother, to be honest with you. So that's Strat. Philip Nyland. Have you had any success with dry yeast in a cider? I only used SO4 and D47. Both gave clear super dry cider which I have to lager for 2 months before it's drinkable. Don't use those yeasts then, is my obvious answer to that one. And in brackets he says juices and 4 tea bags. Don't know why you're using 4 tea bags. Oh, I do know why you're using 4 tea bags, for tannin, but this is turbo cider, you don't need to worry about it if you're using a decent yeast. Mangrove Jack's M02, I've written down here on my piece of paper, is okay, as is Saf cider. Alright, so go for those two, and you probably won't need to worry about getting the turbo cider twang, which again we'll talk about in this video, and it won't be too dry hopefully for your palate. If it is, then we need to think about back sweetening, which we'll talk about next. Don't use our yeast. I'm assuming you're using an our yeast because you know that our yeast drops out at 1.010 there or thereabouts, and cider yeast drop out all the way down to 1.000, so you get a little bit of sweetness left in there. However, it's going to inhibit the taste of your cider because it's not going to be appley, so you need to use an apple yeast, because don't forget the apple yeast has got a profile of apples. If it's been used before, especially if you're using a liquid yeast, they've actually grown that yeast up and they've used it in ciders and things, so it's going to have a unique apple profile in there. Obviously if you use an ale yeast, it's not. It's made for ales, okay? So why anybody would want to use an ale yeast and then come back and say it works great for them, then that's beyond me. It doesn't make any sense. But like I say, it's up to you. Super Welder 100. Do you back sweeten? If so, how do you do it? Just talking about back sweetening, weren't we? That's a good question. Cidermeister says, also to do with back sweetening. My problem is that if I back sweeten to the level I like, then I risk too much secondary fermenting in the bottle. That's because you're using sugar, and of course sugar is a fermentable, and the yeasties are going to eat that, create CO2, and your bottle's going to go probably explode. Not a fan of artificial sweeteners. So what other options are there? Suppress the yeast with Campden and false carb. Yeah, that's one option, you can do that. Any words of wisdom on this subject would be appreciated. So you've already listed one option there, mate. You can kill the yeast off or with the Campden tablet and then false carb. What you can also do is you can do your cider as normal, okay, pour it into your glass, but then pour in a little bit of apple juice. It doesn't have to be a lot, just to give you some residual sort of sweetness in there. You can also put a little teaspoon of sugar in. It'll fizz up a bit, so be careful of that, but you can do that. You can use 7-Up, something like that, lemonade, any other sort of other versions of soft drinks are available, folks. Anything like that, lemonade, you know, just a little bit in the bottom of the glass. You won't lose much on the ABV, okay, because you know you're drinking a 5% cider. You're not going to lose a lot just by putting a little bit of juice in the glass. Some people don't want that though. That's an extra step for them and it stresses them out, and they just want it right from the bottle. The other option available to you then, if you're going to do that, is to get your bottles, and they've got to be glass bottles. Make sure you're going to use glass bottles. And basically what happens there is you get your glass bottles and you bring them up to a temperature of tap water, you know, like hot tap water. You need to acclimatise them in the hot tap water first before you pasteurise them in really hot water, something like 165 Fahrenheit, 160, 165 Fahrenheit. Look it up on the internet, it's all on there, folks. All of this is on the internet, okay? You just need to look for it. So pasteurising those bottles in extreme heat, 160 as I said, Fahrenheit, there or thereabouts, is the way to do it. It will kill the yeast off and you'll get a sweet cider because you've stopped fermentation early and you kill the yeast. You're stopping the yeast essentially at exactly where you want it to be. That's one way of getting your sweet cider. However, I would advise caution. You're using glass bottles, you're using extreme temperatures. Just be careful, all right? Put goggles on, whatever you're going to do. Make sure you stand well back, because you never know. These things can go wrong and they can explode, and I'm not going to take any responsibility for that at all. That's up to you guys, all right? So you can pasteurise your glass bottles as well. But generally speaking, you can stick in stevia, which is, you know, an artificial sweetener. Here in the UK, stevia's got maltodextrin in. I'm not entirely convinced in the US it's the same ingredients. Some sweeteners also use aspartame. You don't want to use that because it's a chemical that can give people headaches and muck around with their stomach and things. It's not very good for you, folks. So steer clear of that. However, you know, Splendor here in the UK has only got maltodextrin in, and a very, 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 very small amount of something else in there, which I can't remember what it is. So it is an artificial sweetener, and anything artificial is not good for you, folks, is it? Let's be honest. You want to be using proper ingredients. A Duke of Medina says, so far I've only made 5 litre turbos, but I've now got a 15 litre demijohn. Do I multiply everything by 3 to make it 15 litres? Thanks. Well, pretty much, yeah, you do. However, if you look on the cartons of your pectolase and your malic acid and your tea bags, tannin, look on the little tubs of that. It will tell you on the tubs, folks. You can't go wrong with this, honestly. However, do you really need pectolase in? Do you really need malic acid in? And do you really need tannin in? I would say if you're using a quality yeast, you don't need any of that. Again, these are chemical additions you're chucking in there. You don't really. You're going to be drinking this stuff. Do you want to be chucking this stuff down your neck? Brewmaster Ben, does temperature control matter as much on a cider as it does an ale? Well, the ideal temperatures of cider are somewhere between 68 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit, so that's what, 20 C to 23.8, something like that. However, you can get away with fermenting up to around about 27. So cider yeasts are, generally speaking, a little bit more forgiving than ale yeasts and any other type of yeast. You can get away with using it in a warmer room. I have done it. The flavours can vary a little bit though. You do get a little bit sort of more of a funky smell and taste. So you need to be careful. I have found, for me personally, and again this is just me, anywhere between 22 and 24 degrees is absolutely fine for me. But as I say, you know, you use your own temperatures. Do what you want, folks. It's your cider at the end of the day, isn't it? If you want to brew it at a lower temperature, see what happens. Do a demijohn, of course. Don't use a big one. Do a small one. And if it doesn't work out, you chuck it down the sink and you do another one, don't you? You've only lost, what, 4 cartons of apple juice? no big deal, is it? But generally speaking, I tend to do them around about 24 degrees, anyway, 22 to 24 degrees. So basically room temperature. David Marks, understanding that everybody's tastes are different, which brand of apple juice would you rate the best for a turbo cider? He's been a bit cheeky here because he's asking two questions here. Are there any nasties out there to avoid? Are any sweeter or drier than others? I read somewhere a while ago that a lot of our apple juice comes from China. Well, I don't know about that, but me personally, and that's what you're asking, I use Waitrose apple juice. I don't work for Waitrose, by the way. Other supermarkets are available, folks, because I find their brand of apple juice, the one you can get 4 cartons for £3 something, £3.50, something like that, however much they charge, is a really nice juice. It's beautiful juice. It's really nice and crisp. And when I use a premium yeast, such as the White Lab cider yeast and the Y Yeast cider yeast, I find it keeps a lot of that flavour. Some of the other supermarket concentrated apple juice don't keep the flavour. Some of them are a little bit thinner than others as well, and I think Waitrose have got their apple juice just right, which is why I choose to use their juice if I can. However, you know, the premium supermarkets, Sainsbury's, Tesco's at a push, are fine, but obviously if you're going to go to Lidl and Aldi, and I'm not having to go at Lidl and Aldi, but their juices are a little bit thinner than the ones in Waitrose, in my opinion, which may or may not be right. Alright, so what have we got left? Oh, one other thing I wanted to say about that is when you are selecting the juice that you're going to use for your ciders, don't use a apple drink. Now, use the word drink there. Anything that says drink rather than juice is generally speaking a 50-50. So it's water, 50% water and 50% apple juice. You don't want that because you're going to end up with a really thin drink that's basically just going to be alcoholic water with a little hint of apple juice in there. You don't want that. So there you go. Tip number 3748. Phigili, I think that's how you pronounce it. Phigili, that's how it's spelled. Phgillee, Phigili. My recent batch of cider had quite a bitter sour taste to it, and I'm a bit concerned as I'm still a newbie. I bottled it and it's sitting in the basement at the moment. I'm wondering, how long do you usually age them in the bottle, and will this sour taste mellow out after a few months? I'm not expecting any miracles, but I'd hope that the acidity will go down a bit with some aging. Also, do you sometimes add potassium sorbate to get the fermentation to stop, or do you prefer to let it ferment fully? Yes, the old turbo cider twang, folks. Those that have been making turbo cider for a while will be familiar with the turbo cider twang. It's that sort of acidity flavour, and it makes the side of your cheeks tingle like that, and when you drink it, and it's basically not very pleasant at all. But you still continue to drink it because you think that's the best that you can do. It's not the best that you can do. It's going to mellow out a little bit the longer you leave it, okay? 6 to 12 months, something like that. But if you use a premium yeast, such as the Y yeast or the White Labs, you won't get that twang in the first place. You're going to end up with a medium dry cider, but then if you want a slightly sweeter cider, then you need to think about stopping fermentation early, as we've already discussed. Pasteurising if you want to, or back sweetening, and do it that way. And false carbon, of course, if you're going to kill the yeast off, because, you know, if you kill the yeast off, you're not going to be able to continue fermentation in the bottle if you add the sugar in there. So hopefully that answers your question. Mike Horsley, can you wash the yeast after fermentation and reuse it like you can with beer? Yeah, you can. Of course you can. Do it all the time. You don't need to wash it immediately. I have made ciders where I've basically siphoned off the cider into bottles, you know, put the sugar in, carbonated it, put it under the stairs or whatever, forgotten about it, and with the yeast that's left in the bottom of the demijohn or the fermenting bucket, just chuck apple juice over the top of it and it will kick off straight away. You can get away with doing that once or twice before you need to wash the yeast though. You can only do it a couple of times because then you'll get all sorts of mutant yeasties in there, and you don't want to do that. So yeah, if you know how to wash yeast, go for it. But generally speaking, you can get away with doing it at least once without worrying about that. All right, I've done it and it's been fine. Mark Crewolf, if I couldn't afford the 775 yeast, what would you recommend? So I've already mentioned the Saf cider, haven't I? Here in the UK, it's quite difficult to get hold of. I don't know where everybody else is from, but certainly in the UK, there's only one place I know that does it online. Where you are, it may very well be different. The Mangrove Jack's M02 dry cider yeast is also freely available out there. However, for the price you pay for it, I think it's about £3.20 sachet, something like that, over £3. I would argue that you're better off paying another £3 and getting a vial of the liquid yeast and growing it up on a stir plate, because that way you'll make your money back in the long run. Failing that, if you want to go for a non-cider yeast, I can't recommend any other yeast other really than Lavlin EC1118, which is a champagne yeast. That's really good. That produces a really nice cider. However, it's going to be very dry, folks. So if you like dry ciders, great, you can use that and it will turn out really nice. If you don't like dry ciders, again, you need to think about what you're going to be doing to get that sweetness back in there. Dave Cullen, 2 questions, mate. Oh yes, oh, naughty boy, 2 questions. I made 2 batches of cider, one with apple juice and one with red grape juice. How do you expect the grape one to turn out? I don't know, mate. Dave, I don't know. It's your cider, you made it. I don't know how it's going to turn out. I can hazard a guess. And also I don't know what yeast you put in there. So I'm assuming it's just red grape juice and wine yeast. If that's the case, you're going to end up with a sort of alcoholic red grape juice. It's not going to be sparkling rosé or anything like that. It's going to be nowhere near that. It's basically going to be an alcoholic grape juice. Some people might like that. Some people might think it's disgusting. I've done it myself, didn't like it very much. I stuck to just plain apple juice, but that's just me. Can you add some sweetener to the glass after the pour for the same result as back sweetening? Yeah, you can, as we've already discussed. Chuck some 7-Up in there, apple juice, lemonade, other fizzy juices and drinks are available, folks. And get your sweetness back into your drink that way. But as I say, some people can get a little bit funny about that, and there's an extra step for me to worry about. Not really, is it? Just make sure you've got some 7-Up or lemonade or other apple juices and drinks are available, folks, lying near you, and you just pour it in and away you go. You will get a bit of a twang in that grape juice as well, of course. Where are we? Oh, Dan Westland. I almost forgot Dan Westland. I'm looking to clone a sweet cider for the missus. I'm wanting to replicate the strawberry and lime flavour. Now, we've already spoken about how to get a sweet cider, haven't we? Okay, so let's not go over that again. I've got the strawberry sorted using Ribena, but not the lime. Any ideas? Dan also mentions the cider is put a sweetener in there and it's given it chemical taste, which is what we spoke about earlier. Don't use it then. Think of another way of which you can get that sweetness back into your cider, and we've already discussed that as well, so we don't need to go over that. But what I will say is that you're never going to come close to a Kopparberg strawberry and lime turbo cider, alright? Because in order for you to get something like that, you're going to need to spend an awful lot of time thinking about the quality of the product, pH levels, acidity, all that kind of jazz. Putting extra ingredients in there, adding lime. You're going to overdo it with the lime though. It's going to take an awful lot of time for you to get it how you like it. You're going to waste a lot of juice, and if you're going to go to all that trouble then you may as well be making a proper cider rather than a turbo cider, using real apples and worrying about your pH levels and the acidity, and using, you know, precipitated chalk, which I can't even say properly, to help you with your acidity and all that kind of jazz, and your malic acid. And it's chemistry, folks. Really, it really is. You know, if you want to make a proper cider, then you need to basically be really good at working out all those levels of acidity and you know, the chemical levels that go into creating a decent cider. You can stop fermentation early with potassium sorbate, as we've already discussed, and cold crash it, but there's no real way of avoiding sediment, which you've also mentioned, mate, in your bottles, unless you know, you keg it, basically. All right, so that's you sorted out, matey. Only a couple more to go, folks, I promise you, and then we'll be out of here quicker than you can say Tama Tawakatangi Hangi. Cidermeister, what's your thoughts on adding hops, e.g. dry hopping? I might imagine this will be a love-hate thing, but I've never tried it. Now, it's interesting that you mentioned that, Cidermeister, because I have done it. Now, if you look on some of my really old videos, now you've got to go back a couple of years now, because when I first started brewing ciders, I was putting in malic acid and tannin and all the chemicals that I'm saying to you now don't put in. Avoid it if you can. So you learn by your mistakes, folks. I certainly did. I have done dry hopping. There is a video on YouTube, an early one, maybe Homebrew Wednesday number 4, something like that, where I do exactly that. I dry hop a cider with some hops. If you're going to do it, I recommend you start smaller though, on smaller scale, 5 to 10 grams of Citra maybe. Use one of the C's, you know, the Cascade Citra, one of those, and you can't go wrong, because you want that. You don't want to steer too far away from the apple flavour. You want to keep it kind of fruity, and you know, using one of the C's, one of the C hops, I think is probably the best bet if you want to give it a little bit of a go yourself. All right, it wasn't for me really. I mean, it was okay, but not my cup of tea. But yeah, it's all about experimentation, mate. So start small, as I said, see how you get on with it, and then, you know, amp it up to maybe 25 grams per gallon, something like that, if you want a really hoppy cider. Big Banana Brewing, what is malic acid for? I read somewhere that lemon juice can also be used as a replacement. That is true, but my turbo cider now tastes lemony. It's not terrible, it's just a bit odd, a bit like me then, isn't it? And what do you think of hop cider? Well, I've already spoke about that, haven't I? What is malic acid for? Malic acid is an acid that is naturally in cider apples. It's not in eating apples. So when you're making a cider, by putting malic acid back into your cider, you're naturally putting back into it something that has been taken out because you're using supermarket apple juice. You need to be careful though, because again, we're getting into the realms of chemistry here. Right? By adding malic acid to a cider, you're gonna end up creating a tartness that you otherwise wouldn't get. And if the acid is too low, then the pH levels will be too high, and you could get infections. And if it's too high, then you get a really sharp twang. You know, that twang I was talking about. You'll get this turbo cider twang. You need to really think about whether you can be bothered, because we are talking about turbo ciders. Again, I keep going back to this. Turbo cider is supposed to be quick and simple, which is why we use the word turbo. All right. Apple juice and yeast, that's all you need. You don't need to worry about tannin and pectolase. Certainly don't add why are you putting pectolase in there if you don't put any additional fruit in there? You don't need to. But you can if you want, and you need to experiment with, you know, your levels, what you're used to, your taste buds. Your taste buds are going to be different to mine. I have found, just by using apple juice and a decent yeast, liquid yeast, we don't have to worry about all that other stuff. All right, hopefully that helps. Probably not, but hey. Halvis has entered the building, folks. When making turbo cider, can I use any type of juice, or does it have to be from concentrate? Yes, you can use any type of juice. Apple juice, it has to be apple juice though, folks. Otherwise it's not cider, is it? Cider has got apples in. Yeah, see? If you use pear juice, it's a perry, isn't it? If you use just, I don't know, pineapple, you're not making a pineapple cider, you're making an alcoholic pineapple drink. Cider's got nothing to do with it, unless there is some apple juice in there as well. Sorry, I'm being a little bit anal about this, but you know. I would say, yes, you can certainly use 100% apple juice, not from concentrate. However, here in the UK, fresh apple juice, not from concentrate, costs more than the stuff you get that is 100% concentrated. Makes perfect sense to me. All right, probably everybody else. The other thing you need to bear in mind is that once those yeasties get to work on the sugars within that drink, you're going to end up virtually with the same product, because it's just going to convert the sugar to alcohol, and it's not going to be a lot in it, folks, really, for the extra bit of money that you pay for 100% from apples and not from concentrate juice. It's not worth it. You may as well stick to your concentrate, but that's just my opinion. Also, you want to try and avoid the apple juice with bits in, because particularly something like Capella, because that has so much stuff floating in there. I mean, it's a really nice apple drink, isn't it? It's beautiful. It's apple, I should say apple juice, sorry, not apple drink. It's an excellent apple juice. I love it. I can't get enough of it. However, put it into a demijohn, chuck some yeast on it, and you watch how much sediment it produces. You're talking about, for, you know, a quarter of a demijohn's full of bits and bobs lying at the bottom of your demijohn, and you lose therefore roughly a litre and a half of your end product through monk. There's no such word, Roy. Well, there is now. It's muck at the bottom of a demijohn. It's otherwise known as monk from now on. Mulch is what I meant to say. So yeah, that's it. I can't really say any more than that about it. I think we've gone through them all now, folks. So thank you for asking me your questions. Hopefully some of them have been satisfactory, if not all of them. Again, I must stress, these are just my opinions, all right? You don't have to say what I say. You don't have to do what I do. I'm just telling you what I have found from my couple of years or so of doing turbo ciders. My favourite, as everybody knows, is the WLP 775 White Labs yeast. I know I'm going to get a product that is exactly the same every time I make it. It's going to be a high quality turbo cider. Failing that, the next one I would use would be the Y yeast, which is more or less the same price. In fact, it's exactly the same price as the White Labs. Use the Y yeast Smack Pack one. That's also very, very good. And you can grow that up on a stir plate too and cultivate it. If you want to know how to do that, I've done videos on how to do that, folks, so look in the history, the YouTube history, and you'll be able to see yourself on how to grow those yeasts up. I will do a video in the future of growing a yeast up from beginning to end, and also doing another turbo cider just to show you once again from beginning to end, this is a process and this is how it tastes. Again, be careful, don't chuck stuff in there that you don't want in there. Just use apple juice if you can, and no extra crap. If you're going to put in stuff like Ribena, additional concentrates, I don't know, stuff like the Polish strawberry Melina, is it strawberry or is it raspberry? I can't remember now. That kind of stuff that you can get on the supermarket shelves. Check the bottle. If you've got any worries about what's in there, stick it on the boil with some apple juice just for 15 minutes or so. Get rid of any nasties that might be in there before you chuck it into your demijohn. Don't pour boiling hot water into a demijohn or apple juice or anything like that, anything boiling hot, folks, it will split and you'll end up with glass everywhere. So that's the final tip from me, folks. Thanks for your questions. Hope you've found some of it useful, and leave your comments below, and I'll see you on the next one. Ta-da!